purely just out of the blue, just thought I'd mention it now rather than down the line. I've had a little nibble for the National Hunt Chaser. I just think he stays forever, and he's got such...
What price did you get for that?
25 to 1. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Racing YouTube channel in association with Racing TV. What a weekend of racing we have coming up. We've got the Tingle Creek at Sandown, we've got the Becher Chase at Aintree, and then we've got that jam-packed card at Fairyhouse on Sunday with the return of Honeysuckle. But before we go into that, we will talk about the last week in racing, and we'll go into every one of the smart performances or performances that we need to touch on that maybe disappointed us going forward towards the spring festivals, such as the Cheltenham Festival. Very, very exciting. Jungle Pros yet again off 125. She's now rated 137. She's up a further £12. 4 to 1 she returned.
Yeah, I think everyone tried to latch on to the fact that she couldn't possibly win off 125. She wouldn't do an handstands. Yeah, I had a decent day on the Thursday. St. Donna won. Had a horse that went very close, Harry Desangre, but I think the less said about Velvet Elvis, the better, to be honest. I thought he had a really good chance. The money came for him. It looked like everything was in situ for a good run. He just didn't jump. And unfortunately, in a race like the Troytown, you knew your fate after one or two fences. You know, he backed off the first, he landed on the second, and it was curtains from there. So unfortunate for people that did follow in, but fingers crossed we can make it back this week.
Yeah, plenty of best bets. They'll come at the end of this video. And before anyone says anything, I had a few comments on the last video talking about the hat. It's one of those where I've been busy with work. I've not yet got to a barber, so we're just going to go with the Let's Talk Racing hat and a Racing TV Christmas jumper, which I'm sure you'll be able to get in a week or so's time at Racing TV. But let's fire then through the last week in racing. We'll go back to last Thursday at Thurles. We had the return of Il Était Temps, who ran extremely well in the Triumph Hurdle. He was still a maiden, so he did turn up in a maiden hurdle, and he was impressive, and I suspect bigger tasks away. I think he's one of those horses, Andrew, that might be quite competitive in one of the Grade 1 2-mile novice hurdles at, say, Leopardstown at Christmas. Maybe not as good as Facile Vega, but a horse that can finish or place behind him.
Yeah, I suppose so. Look, he won pretty impressively. It was a race he was entitled to win. I think he went off 1 to 6 at SP. There's plenty of horses in behind that aren't up to a whole pile. So he was entitled to win. He went out in front. He jumped okay. No more than that. He'd be a horse for me. I just don't see it with him really at Grade 1 level. I don't know why that is. He'd be a horse that I'd see maybe being able to land a blow in a county hurdle, perhaps a really strongly run 2-mile handicap down the line where you can get him settled, you can bury him in a pack, and fingers crossed he could come home strong for you. I think he's a horse of ability, but I wouldn't have him up at Grade 1 level now myself.
I thought he was better than that, personally. I think he is a graded horse, and it'll be interesting to see what he does this season. Maybe not a Grade 1 winner over hurdles, but I do think he was a graded performer. Let's then go over to Newbury on Friday, and the first race was exciting because we had a hot pot Dan Skelton novice, who Dan, when we went to see him, was very complimentary about, and then we had Jet Powered for the Donnellys and Nicky Henderson. Obviously, they team up with the likes of Shishkin, and he did look a little bit Shishkin-esque in the actual frame of him and his colouring. He was very impressive. What did you make of his win?
Yeah, you had to be impressed. He's gone and put ITAC Blue away pretty impressively in the end. I suppose if you were being a little bit crabby, did he hit the line quite as hard as you've seen the likes of Shishkin and LTR et al. Do in the last few years in those types of races? Maybe not, but he'd done the hard work at that stage. He jumped pretty professionally, and there'll be good tasks ahead. Would I be backing him for the Supreme at 5-6 to 1? The current price he is certainly not. I think he's very skimpy. He probably should still be double that price, but he's probably going to end up being the top 2-mile novice hurdler in England. So as a result, is he entitled to be second or third in the market for the Supreme? Probably so.
Yeah, I can see that. He was a horse that I talked up a lot during the summer as an exciting one to look forward to. I must admit, he won extremely well, but I don't think he's a 2-miler. I think he's a proper galloper. I think he'd be seen to best effect up in trip. And why I say that is I look back on a few of Nicky Henderson's horses. He always loves to start them in 2-mile maiden hurdles or 2-mile novice hurdles at Newbury. And some of the really good ones in the last year, he's obviously had plenty of winners. Some haven't gone on to achieve a lot. Some have. The ones that have, the likes of Shishkin. Nico waited until jumping the last, where Shake 'em Up Harry led him over the last. Nico asked him a question and he took off. So the confidence that he had in Shishkin with the pace suggested that he was a much quicker horse than Jet Powered, because Jet Powered didn't actually hit the front. Well, he hit the front very early, 3 out, and he just galloped and galloped and galloped. So Nico was clearly keen to use his stamina rather than turn a foot. I even look back at Chantry House. Again, Barry Geraghty rode in that day, but he was a lot more patient on him because he knew the turn of foot was there. Bouvidere, Noel Feely, exactly the same. He jumped the last and then he went away. Joss's Hill you can even look back on as a horse that did something similar. So I thought it was interesting that Nico sent him on so early. Maybe he found himself there. The tricky thing with Jet Powered is I'd like to see him again because he won the race between 3 and 2 out. Nico effectively eased him down at the line, whether I'd have almost loved to see Nico give him a slap and see what was still there. We didn't get to see that. I want to see him again before I think he's a proper Supreme candidate. And I maybe think there was a slight overreaction for his Supreme chances. Obviously, I can understand it with connections, but I would be lukewarm on Jet Powered for the Supreme. On the same card in the 2.5 mile novice hurdle, highlighted on the podcast, Paul Nicholls ran Stay Away Faye, who'd won the race the last 2 years with Brave Man's Game and Stage Star. They both went on to win the shallow hurdle back at Newbury in the end of December. This lad's a proper stayer. He reeled in the Nicky Henderson horse, but it took him a long time to do it.
Yeah, he looked cooked turning in. He seemed to lack a little bit for tactical pace. Russian Ruler was given an enterprising ride. Now he stopped as if shot after the last. But it was a nice performance. I wouldn't be getting over the top until we see this horse in 3 mile chases. He's actually a funny horse of Nicholls. He doesn't, as much as he's going to be a 3 mile chaser, he doesn't even strike me as going to be that kind of King George-esque horse for Nicholls. He's a really raw, big horse. He's going to be a Newbury type horse. Like it's down more that Denman ilk rather than maybe the slightly pacier types of the Brave Man's Games, the Hitmans. I thought it was a really nice performance. Would I be getting carried away this year as a novice hurdler? No. He might run in a Sefton perhaps come the end of the season, but other than that, I wouldn't be going against him, but at the same stage, I'd be maybe cooling it for this year, and I'm really going to look forward to him in 3 mile novice chases next year.
I think over 2.5 miles, it'd be hard to see him beating Hermes Allen from the same stable, for instance. I do think the Sefton in April would be one for Stay Away Faye. Sebastopol beat a disappointing Paul Nicholls horse in Stage Star. Is the jury out with Stage Star now? Is he just simply unreliable? For me, he's on my blacklist now.
Yeah, it was a poor enough effort. He jumped shoddily, considering he was foot perfect at Warwick, and you wouldn't know what to do with him now. Sebastopol, good on him, very good placing from Tom Lacey, good aggressive placing. If you're not in these races, you can't win them, but he's as exposed as they come in a lot of respects. He's a grand, good grade 3 horse maybe, but you'd expect Stage Star to have beaten him. He didn't, and as a result, you'd have to be a little bit wary about backing him again this season.
He was looking round up the running as well. I just think he might be fragile mentally. Moving on then to the long distance hurdle, Champ got the better of Paisley Park. In a ding-dong battle, I thought Champ was given an absolute peach of a ride by John Joe O'Neill Jr., who I think is just getting better and better and better. And it's good to see him sat on these proper graded horses. It was almost like rolling back the years, wasn't it? A couple of years ago, I'd have expected Champ versus Paisley Park.
Yeah, certainly. It was a great race. It was a great finish. I think, as you say, John Joe O'Neill has won the race probably in the early strides of the race, getting a freebie up front. He dictated the pace. It was near on Danny Mullins on Flooring Porter-esque stuff, and Paisley Park didn't quite get him. I think Aidan Coleman, based off his interview with Racing TV after the race, I think he was pretty devastated that he wasn't able to get up. Maybe if he'd flew the last, he may have got there, but it was good to see. It's not a great indictment of where the English staying division is, though, because I'm looking at it now, and like Flooring Porter, I think is around 11-2, 6-1 for the Stayers Hurdle, and it's near on becoming a very decent bet at those prices, I must say, because that nothing's coming from left field over in England, and I feel he's got the Irish horses covered as well. So I don't know where it leaves the overall picture, but the fact that a Prashima, not that I fancied him going into Friday, but he completely blotted his copybook. And is he really up to that level at grade 1, grade 2 level? He probably isn't. Looking
at the winner moving forward to, say, a Stayers Hurdle in March, I think the only way that Champ can really be competitive in that is if they almost keep him fresh. I know that's not a great thing for racing, but he seems to be so good fresh. He was very good in the long walk last year. then disappointed after when he ran in the Cleve and the Stayers. He was very good again in the long distance hurdle. You'd almost want him to not run again before the festival if you wanted to punt him for the Stayers hurdle. But obviously, as a racing fan, you want to see him before. The one thing with Champ is you can tell so early on if he's going to run a big race, because if he's not pulling John Joe's arms out, no chance. You almost, after a furlong, you need to go, well, that's done. He's never going to get home. That's where Champ's at his best. And he definitely had that at the weekend. Saturday then, Newbury, Lucia won the first Amers Novice Hurdle. I thought she was very good. I still think there might be one or two better.
Yeah, she was extremely good. She jumped very efficiently for her hurdling debut. James Bone gave her a good ride. You know, she should have been beating the horses she was beating, though these are horses that have all been beaten themselves previously already this season. And I'd be awfully shocked if Mullins doesn't have a couple in the tank. And to be honest, even the likes of Magical Zoe up in for Henry, like that piece of form up in Down Royal is working out absolutely superbly. She's one certainly to keep the right side of. I think she's double the price of Lucia for the Mares Novice. I know which one I prefer to back.
Moving on to McFabulous's win. He now has kind of stamped down a marker for the Quarto Star, hasn't he?
He has, yeah. In isolation, I know a lot of people are talking about Time Hill in this race, and I know that's where the stories revolve around. But in isolation, McFabulous was superb on Saturday, I thought. He jumped well, he travelled well, and he's now beginning to really see out his 3 miles, which is something he wasn't able to do earlier in his career. I think he'd take a heap of beating in the Quarto Star if he goes round jumping like that. The cheek pieces seem to have sharpened him up, and I mentioned it after his Exeter run. He seems to have finally gone the other way in terms of he used to pull Harry Cobden's arms out and not get home. Now he's almost a little bit behind the bridle at times, but does find and does get home, like he showed at Exeter. Time Hill, my lord. If I was connections of Time Hill, I'd be just looking at the end of the weekend going, why on earth were we not running in the big race on Friday? If Champ and Paisley Park are still fighting out the finish of that race, Time Hill would have been entitled to be banged there. Instead, he's getting his arse whipped in a novice chase. I don't see why they went over fences. And it's another Goshen situation. I'm going to be pretty consistent on this throughout the year. Why reinvent the wheel when the wheel is perfectly fine the way it is? He
just simply does not like chasing one bit. I think he's just a warrior. Because he's not the biggest horse in the world. And in a weird way, I think Defi de Soy was quicker, but he reminds me of Defi de Soy. I think they were both kind of 16 and a half hands, not particularly physically imposing horses. And he's just getting into the bottom of them and then ballooning over. And it's so harsh on him when he's coming back down. The one thing I would say is if they're going to persist with chasing, I don't think it's the worst idea in the world to drop him down in trip. Get them going a little bit quicker and maybe they might make up his mind for him. Because I think if they just go that little bit quicker, he won't have the time to think. But at the moment, he's such a sticky one. I wouldn't be fancying him for any novice chase in March. I'd be surprised if they do go down the chasing route. Maybe they give him one more run. Maybe drop him down with something like the Scilly Isles later on in the early spring, late winter, and find out if he is a chaser or not. But from early impressions, he doesn't look like one. First Street won the Jerry Fielden off 146. He's been put up £4 to 150 now. Not so much the weekend because I thought he was good beating the Paul Nicholls mare they had to give a lot of weight to. But he was 1 length behind State Man in the county hurdle, giving him £1. State Man's now rated 164. First Street's gone and won, and he's only 150. I think there could still be a little bit of movement in his mark. Maybe if they were to keep him for something like the Betfair Hurdle, he'd go off top weight, but he'd almost give a great account of himself. It looks like the International's next, so he's going to step up into graded company. But I was quite surprised that he only got £4.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was a really good performance, actually. It would have been one of the ones I was most impressed with all weekend. He was giving so much weight away to a pretty talented horse in second, and he really dug down deep and got the job done. It's a hard one because I can understand where connections are coming from, because you look at the way the International Hurdle is going to shape up, and probably the horse he has to beat is I Like to Move It, and you'd fancy him. Yeah, potentially so, but I don't know. I still have doubts about Nappers Hill. I know I shouldn't at this stage, but I still somehow do. Look, he's got a good chance if he does go up in grade to a grade 2. I wouldn't have him out of place in that race. But as you say, he's not far off the mark. And if you've held him for a Betfair Hurdle and maybe you put a Ben Bromley on him or something, somebody quite good that would claim 5 or claim 7, you're suddenly in with a real good chance.
Another fantastic weekend for Team Skelton. They won the Coral Gold Cup with La Milos, beating the two pipe horses. What did you make of it?
Yeah, it was a fantastic training performance from Dan. He's got this horse from Tim Vaughan. He's obviously won at Bangor, head and chest, and has got in here off a nice mark and has done the job. Harry Skelton was superb in the saddle. The two pipe horses have ran terrific races, don't get me wrong, but it didn't look like either of them really wanted to go by La Milos. I think Remastered certainly had every opportunity to do so and didn't quite manage it. So it's a hard one. Like when you've got a horse that's run so well and has been beaten a half length in second, I find it hard to completely crab him. But at the same stage, I'm not sure. I think that race could have been going on another 2 or 3 furlongs and Remastered would never have gone by.
Jericho Rock is going to win the Classic Chase at Warwick in January. Proper stayer. I think he's just slow.
Well, I think he's a very good horse, and I understand your premise with Jericho Rock. And I'd give you I'd give you very short odds that Jericho Rock will finish second or third in the Classic Chase. But you have to accept that this horse doesn't like winning at this stage. He really doesn't.
I want to see him run at Warwick in January, and then the jury will be out for me. I think that race is absolutely made for him. Let's go to Doncaster then on Saturday, and we did want to mention Rare Edition for Charlie Longston, who went there with an awfully big price tag. He's won 2 relatively small events over hurdles, and I'd imagine a step up in grade is almost imminent. Maybe the Supreme Trial at Haydock keep him up north?
Yeah, potentially so. It'll be a race and a horse that maybe will have gone under the radar on Saturday. There was so much racing on that maybe people wouldn't have seen Doncaster. But I thought he was really impressive. Charlie Longston's got a nice little team of horses brewing up at the moment. We were talking about Western Zephyr in the last week's episode. This horse looks another good novice. Probably needs a step up in trip. I'd have thought at graded level. They may try him at 2 miles at graded level, see where he is, but I think in time he's going to need 2.5, maybe even 3 miles.
We had the return of Manella Kakuna, who was, I think at the start of the season, high up on everybody's list of exciting novice chasers. He actually finished second to stablemate Classic Getaway, who did cost Cheveley Park £570,000 after winning a point-to-point very impressively. He's been disappointing over hurdles, but he's a massive frame, and maybe he just needs fences to eke out improvement. I know Manella Kakuna didn't win, but I probably wouldn't be giving up on him. I think he was beaten first start last year, and he just seems a horse that would naturally progress. I think he jumped reasonably well. I think this race is very good. Yeah,
usually these beginners' chases at Gorn do tend to be, because it's nice soft ground. Manella Kakuna, you'd give him another chance, certainly. He's a very fizzy horse. You'd think a race will slightly knock that fizz out of him and he might be a little bit more settled next time. That being said, probably the way the race panned out, you'd be a little bit disappointed he hasn't gone and got the job done. He got a bit of a freebie out in front. He jumped well. Didn't seem to be many excuses. So therefore, I think you can mark up the performance of the winner, Classic Getaway. He jumped superbly. As you say, he's an enormous horse. And I keep seeing people saying that he looked big in the parade ring, and therefore people thought that he'd be, of all 3 of the Mullins runners, the one that would improve the most for it. So that's potentially interesting. I don't know where they'd go next. They may take in the Grade 1 at Limerick at Christmas time, very similar, 2.5 miles. It'll be heavy ground again. That maybe is right up his street. So certainly one to keep the right side of, because he's going to be a completely different proposition over fences than he was over hurdles, where he looked a little bit of a mule.
I think this race is a perfect example of what's going wrong with British racing currently. So let me just go through this race, Andrew. Right. So the winner, Classic Getaway, cost 570 grand. The second, Manella Kakuna, was a Grade 1 winner of the hurdles. The third, What Do You Want, finished third in the Ballymore. The sixth, Sam's Profile, a Grade 2 winner, and he's rated 146. Journey With Me fell 5-1 for the Ballymore. Are you telling me now, right? So outside of the Cheltenham Festival and Aintree, that the biggest 2.5 mile Grade 1 novice chase over here is the Scilly Isles? Do you think the Scilly Isles will be deeper than that beginner's chase?
No, not at all. But that's because the small fields, people are wary of running their horses. The thing that I can't quite comprehend, I must say, and I know there's times where Willie Mullins will take his horses out because they're good ground and stuff like that. Because I know the ground issue is very relevant at the moment. there doesn't seem to be half as much ground issues in Ireland, though. Like when it's soft or heavy, say heavy ground at Gordon, nobody has any issues running their horses. Gordon loves heavy ground. Willie loves heavy ground. As for you get, like the Scilly Isles is usually run on heavy ground at Sandown in kind of the end of January, and all these trainers are going, oh, we couldn't possibly run our horse on heavy ground. So you've got a situation where you've got a beginner's chase at Gorham Park, which you could have slapped probably a Grade 2 sign beside it, and it wouldn't have been out of place. And Classic Getaway's potentially a Grade 2 winner based off that performance. Falcano was out the back. He's a horse that's going to rock up at the festival, maybe in a Kim Muir, maybe in the plate off 140 or something. Like, he's that type of horse, and yet he was beaten 45, 50 lengths. So yeah, it's just one of these things. I remember Bob Ollinger, I think, won this beginner's chase last year. Master McShee was in behind him. Mercury Lane was in behind him. There was an awful lot of good horses, and they just keep stacking up. And you look at this weekend at Fairyhouse, the maiden hurdles or the beginner's chases on Saturday, there's tremendous horses running. Not only the big priced horses, but there's 4 or 5 horses in behind that could easily be graded performers.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Let's go back to the racing. I know the way you're thinking beat Imagine at Gorham Park on the same card. Probably not a Grade 1 horse, but if they campaign him cleverly, you could definitely see him turning up in a handicap at Cheltenham.
I don't know, Josh. I reckon this horse is a Grade 1 horse. I was so impressed with him on Saturday. Everything went against him. Imagine got an absolute freebie for Jack Kennedy. He's bringing good form to the table, and he's kicked at the back of 2 out, and I backed Imagine, and I'm counting my cash down to the last. And I know the way you're thinking. He bungles the last. He's down 2.5 lengths, and he quickens up like a smart horse. The horse he beat, the mare he beat down in Cork for Willie's, very good flat horse. I don't think anyone thought she could be beat on hurdles debut. Went and beat her. He's got to beat Imagine despite form being against him. So I think he's one to certainly keep the right side of, even at Grade 1 level. And the one that certainly people need to be looking at is this Spanish Harlem back in third. Very similar profile to Galopin Des Champs. Galopin Des Champs was actually beaten in this race as well when he came over from France. Wouldn't surprise me at all if Spanish Harlem suddenly rocking up with Kieran Buckley or Kieran Callahan taking 5 or 7 pounds off him in a Martin Pipe come March.
Does that get you excited?
It gets me very, very excited, I must say. Now, because it's Willie, because it's that type of race, it probably won't go unfounded. But, my lord, I thought he ran a very interesting and eye-catching race back in third. I think that form will stand up.
Going into the weekend, the big talking point was the return of Constitution Hill at Newcastle in the fighting fifth up against stablemate EP3.
There's not much to say, really, Josh, that hasn't been said. Like, this horse is just an absolute rocket. He was so good. Perhaps for a stride turning in, you're thinking, EP3's going well. Nico gives him a shake, and suddenly he's 10 lengths clear. And the way he hurdles is magnificent. I don't want to get embroiled in the whole who's better, is he the best we've ever seen. I think it's very early on to be going down that route, but my lord, he's a very, very good horse, and I know Honeysuckle will more than likely win this weekend, but she's going to have to be on her complete and utter A game to have any chance come March.
Do you think he will win the Champion Hurdle?
Yes.
If he turns up in that form, my word. And the scary thing with him, there's probably improvement to come. That was his first run of the season. He's only going to get better potentially. You'd be very surprised if he regressed. I think he's an absolute freak, and I think we should enjoy him whilst we can. La Homme Presse won on the same card, carrying top weight at Newcastle. Very good performance. Is he now a Gold Cup contender? And I think they've kept him in the King George because they were hoping that maybe it might turn soft or heavy ground, and that might see him run. Is he one to put it up to Braveman's game, or would you say Hitman would still be the danger?
It's a hard one to know. I don't think Kempton would necessarily be his track, but he's a very good horse, La Homme Presse. La Homme Presse, should I say. He's a very good jumper. I love Charlie Deutsch on him. He just gets the horse to jump superbly. He had the race in relatively safe keeping. And he has an each-way chance in a Gold Cup. There's no getting away from that. He's won a Brown Advisory on soft ground. You'd prefer soft ground come March if he was to have a chance in the race. My only gripe, Josh, I don't know what you think about this. Like, would you not expect any horse that's in the top 5 or 6 in the Gold Cup to be beating into overdrive up at Newcastle? Like, I understand he's off top weight. I understand it's great to see graded animals winning top grade handicaps off a big weight. He's giving lumps of weight away to an in-form horse. But into overdrive's rated 138. And he's been a revelation for connections, but he'd need to start today to run in the Gold Cup and have a sniff. So, he's beaten him a length and a half. Should he not be beating him a length and a half? Like, I just think people were slightly people love these weight-carrying performances because they then just think about Denman, and we have Denman on our Twitter timelines for the end of time, and I understand that. But, like, Denman was giving stones away to Grade 1 horses. This horse was giving stones away to handicappers, and he beat them as I feel a horse of Grade 1 capability should be beating them.
I'm just not sure Kempton will suit. Now, trust me, in the back of my brain, I'm going, Allaho's come out, I've lost a bit of money there, and I have backed Brave Man's Game. So I would love Lahon Presse not to run. But I do genuinely, from a non-biased point of view, I think Kempton and the King George is the type of track where if it went wrong there, it could ruin his whole season. In the sense of, you look at Manila Indo, I know he ran well, but he didn't win the Gold Cup again. And he was dreadful at Kempton earlier on in the campaign. If we're actually looking at the Gold Cup, I would love to see him go to the Cotswold Chase at Cheltenham and take on Protectorate. I think we would properly learn how good he is there, because I think Protectorate has improved from last year. Take on Protectorate. If you beat Protectorate, boom, you're right up there in the Gold Cup market and you've got a fantastic chance. But learn and find out before. Sunday, Navan, Grange Clare West, riddled with ability, this lad.
Yeah, very much so. If they can keep him right, he's got a very, very good chance in some of these spring festivals. I think he's got so much ability. He obviously won his bumper very impressively. That race has even worked out relatively well. He's then gone and absolutely mopped up in a race that you looked at and went, this is a very competitive maiden hurdle. As we mentioned before, firm footings, coup de chèvre, my trump card. A Charles Burns horse, Summer Melody, was backed from 10s into 3s just before the off. Usually those don't go astray for Burns, but this one did. And this horse won as if he just jumped in at the last and quick and clear. I don't see it with the Albert Bartle with this horse whatsoever. I think he's got too much pace, or he's got too much class. I just don't see why Mullins would. He's got horses, Embassy Gardens and Seabank Bistro and Madman's Game. Potentially these horses can all run in the 3 mile race. He doesn't have necessarily that many that are going to run in this race and in the 2.5 race, and I think he's top of the list at the moment.
I agree. I watched it back a couple of times. I think he's got lots and lots of pace. I actually think he'd almost be better going down to 2 than he would stepping up to 3. He wasn't stopping. And I'm not saying that he could never turn up in an Albert Bartlett, but I do think he's a 2.5 miler. I think the Ballymore is right up his street. You know what impressed me? It was Paul Townend's body language. Like, I think the 3 that finished behind him are fair animals. And Paul was just hacking behind them, didn't flinch, jumped the last, and away he went. And that was what's most impressive. The confidence that Paul Townend had that he would just simply pick up when asked. And he did do that. He's going to come on for it. The Lawlers of Naas is going to be his next target, I believe. And it'll be interesting to see because he'd probably turn up potentially against American Mike, who we'll touch on later in that race. And that might be a very interesting race to watch with Ballymore in mind. Now, let's touch on American Mike. He was beaten by Grey Dawning in the Monksfield Grade 3 novice hurdle. It looked to me like Affordable Fury was going to be his biggest challenger. And I'd actually say Dawn Rising was probably given a quiet ride and hopefully pick up the pieces with handicaps in mind down the line. Little did he know the front 2 in the market would go off like the clappers and completely stop jumping the last, and the race just fell in his hands. But I think the big talking point is American Mike. Obviously, I put him up for the Ballymore in the Ante Post series, this Ante Post series, and I was very disappointed. I still hope that wasn't his best showing. We are going to have to see him again. And hope it wasn't himself and a much better American Mike comes out next time out.
Yeah, it was a hard race to sum up, really. It didn't look at the time like they were going that fast, but they were obviously just biting each other's throats, really, because they were they were just at each other all the way round. You know, American Mike would press ahead, then Affordale Fury would press back up on the inside. Brian Cooper was pretty adamant of trying to stay in the lead. It was... I personally think that Dawn Rising would have won one way or the other, even if Affordale Fury had stood up. I think he was coming to win the race. I think the two of them were absolutely drunk up front. As you say, American Mike's walked over the line, so that's not him. You know, there's no chance that's him. But he does need to improve his jumping. His jumping, I thought, had regressed from Down Royal. I didn't think it was as bad as people made out in Down Royal potentially, but his jumping on Sunday was absolutely hopeless. And Affordale Fury's taken a hard, heavy fall. I doubt we'll see him for a number of months now, recovering from that. And the winner, you know, he's now 10-1 for the Ballymore or something. I couldn't touch him with a barge pole for that type of race. As you say, I think this is oh great, we've won a grade 2, but oh dear, we've absolutely messed up our mark in the process. So it would be a race I'd be confused by, but my worry would be that we won't see American Mike until earliest Dublin Racing Festival, and that's probably going to be him running in the 2.6, because he's going to have to be given a bit of time to regroup and reassess. But you wouldn't, well, I certainly wouldn't fancy him for anything in March at the moment.
Very, very disappointing. I was in the office and there was an American flag and I was waving it, jumping 3 out. I was waving it 2 out, and suddenly the flag was dropped and the hat goes up. And it was just a moment of when you want the world to swallow you up. Moving on to Phil Dorr on the card, who beat Saint-Roi in a 2-mile, 1 furlong beginner's chase. So much to like. So much to like. His attitude is just A1.
Yeah, certainly. It was slightly in question, I suppose, after he slightly blotted his copybook, I thought, in the Fishery Lane, but he was a horse I liked an awful lot last year, and this was back to the Phil Dorr we know and love. His head down, grimly in determination. He jumped well. Saint-Roi jumped okay. He'd need to come forward for that. But it's a race that I think will work out very well. Another one of these beginners' chases that they couldn't get out of each other's way, slightly non-trying out the back, but there's horses in there that will win plenty of races. Obviously, Gallant John Joe was third. Whether he'll win a big handicap or not, I'm not sure at this stage. But Percy Warner, Slip of the Tongue, a lot of decent horses in there. Good Time Johnny was out there as well. So the fact that they were a furlong clear is a good sign. I think the winner will take a bit of stopping actually in the 2-mile grade 1 at Christmas time. He'll have all the allowances. It's a race that Gordon, I think, is going to target with him, and as long as his jumping can stand the test of time, he should go very close.
What do you think his best trip will be come the spring?
I think maybe come the spring, it's 2.5 miles, but at the same stage, he's won over 2 miles there at Navan, and when Gordon was pressed by Gary on track, he said, well, why would we change when he's showing pace for 2 miles? It looked the entirety of last year like he needed a step up in trip, and maybe that will prove to be the case again when he goes to Grade 1 company, but maybe up to 2.5, but I think he's got a little bit more speed than people give him credit for.
I'm going to say something that might be wild and it might shock plenty of people watching, but I've had a small bet on Phil Dorr for the National Hunt Chase following a Tiger Roll route. Purely just out of the blue, just thought I'd mention it now rather than down the line. I've had a little nibble for the National Hunt Chase. I just think he stays forever and he's got such...
What price did you get for that?
25-1. Could he follow a Tiger Roll route where he runs at a Triumph Hurdle, goes chasing, and he's got such a brilliant attitude? I think you could run him over any distance and he'd settle. He jumps great. I think there's a lot to like, and I just thought 25-1 National Hunt Chase. It sounds absolutely ridiculous, and I was putting it on. I was looking at it going, I've really got to question myself here, Josh. Sandor Clegane, you're one of your favourites, beat Demand Driving Duvan. He's back in 4th at Punchestown on Tuesday. He just reminds me a bit of latest exhibition. He's a big lad. Yeah,
he's a big horse. He's a lovely horse as well. And I was delighted, went down to Punchestown on Tuesday, really with the premise of just seeing him and Demand Driving Duvan. It was a very interesting race. And he did it superbly. He settled well. He jumped well. It's a horse that has high-class bumper form from last year. Very, very easy to forget that he beat the likes of Carr and Funnock, the big doyen. It's what unites us in that Grade 2 bumper, Embassy Gardens. He was miles clear of them. I know he was 9 lengths behind Facile Vega, but there's no disgrace in that. The wheels slightly came off at the end of last year. I think he was maybe still feeling the effects of that Leopardstown run. And then he was a good second on hurdling debut at Galway over a trip that was never going to suit. He was a bit big in the parade ring as well. And I think they thought, like the way Pauls have been running and the way they haven't had much success, they haven't had a winner since June up until Tuesday. I feel Sanders' run was a bit of a make or break. And luckily enough, it was make. He was really impressive. I think there's just an awful lot to like about this horse. Obviously, Paul Nolan's identified the Albert Bartlett as being his target. He went so close a couple of years ago with latest exhibition. You'd have to think, I think they're mulling over the Lawlers and Ace, and then maybe the 2-6 at the Dublin Racing Festival. I'd say that will be the route he'll go. I'm not saying he'll win a Lawlers and Ace, but even if he's in the first 2 or 3, you're still dealing with a horse that's potentially very good. And I've hoped for a long time this horse was a Grade 1 horse. He still has to obviously go out and prove it in that company, but performance on Tuesday was much more like a Grade 1 horse than maybe we've seen in his last couple of runs.
There we go. That is our rundown of the last week in racing. Now, because we spent a lot of time on that, we are going to have to quickly fire through. We're going to do a quick fire weekend preview. I'm going to fire races at you. Give me your thoughts. Saturday, Sandown, Henry VIII, John Bond walkabout. Easy, simply just got to get round.
Yeah, looks like it. I don't think the other horses are good enough. Unexpected Party wants to step up in trip as well. He might chase him home, but John Bond should win.
The Tingle Creek, we have the return of Shishkin. Well, we hope we have the return of Shishkin. Edwardstone's in there as well. I just think Grenadine is just the solid option. Even if Shishkin turns up right, Grenadine, he's going to run to what, 167, 168, which is a really good marker. Edwardstone's got to step up on his Arkle form to beat Grenadine. And Shishkin, like, he had so many problems after the champion chase. I think Nicky Henderson said it was all over his body. Is he going to run to 168 first time up? I'd forgive him if he didn't. I think Grenadine's the bet.
Yeah, I agree with you actually on this one. I think he's going to be trained every inch of his life to win this race. Paul usually does so. He loves winning these types of Grade 1s. And Shishkin, you know, I somewhat wonder whether he's even going to run in the race, I must confess. But even if he did, you know, you wouldn't begrudge it if he did get beat, given what's happened to him. I think the rest of them all have it to find. Gentlemen to me wouldn't have in a fit myself. I think Captain Guinness would. And Dunvegan is a very interesting one that they've obviously sent over from Pat Fahey's. You know, he might be able to sweep up a bit of prize money, but it'd be Grenadine for me as well.
Let's move on to Fairyhouse on Sunday. The Grade 3 Juvenile. It looks like Lossie Mouth is going to make her debut for Willie Mullins in a Grade 3. Extremely talented. They must think an awful lot of her. Looks a good race, but one that I think we'll both watch. The Royal Bond Grade 1. 2 mile novice hurdle. Which one do you like in here? We've got Champ Kylie, Marine Nationale, plenty of smart young horses to like.
Yeah, great race. 8 declared for it. I think the declarations have stood up very well for Sunday, which is brilliant. Looking forward to heading down, and I'm just looking forward and hoping, really, that this weekend is the coming of age weekend of Barry Connell as a trainer. He's obviously owned plenty of good horses in his time. He's had the training licence for the last year or two, and I hope Marine Nationale's that standard bearer and flag bearer, really, because he's been so good so far. He obviously hasn't really been tested at the top level, but he's going to be tested on Sunday, and fingers crossed he can pass that test. He's currently 2-1 best price. I think he's a bet, actually. I'd take on Champ Kylie. There's a couple in there prices that have a squeak, certainly, but he'd be the one for me.
Yeah, I could definitely see that angle. I'm going to take a swipe at Path de Reur because I just think he is a 2 miler. He was very impressive the first day, beating It's What Unites Us. He's won since. But if you look at them, I'm not convinced about Champ Kylie being a 2 miler. I don't know why. I'm just not convinced. I think Hercule de Soy isn't up to this Grade 1 level. Irish Point's a 4-year-old. I know he's very impressive, but he ran 2 weeks ago. Like, they seemed like they wanted to mind him, and then they suddenly chucked him into the Royal Bond. I thought it was a strange decision. Marine Nationale, just not sure I trust Barry Connell in the Grade 1s on the big day. Ashrow Diamond, I think, is interesting at 14-1 if she runs, but I'm going to take a swipe. Path de Reur. Let's move on then to the Drinmore. And Banbridge does run. Interesting that he steps up in trip. We've got 3 Stripe Life in there. Mighty Potter. Plenty of exciting young novice chasers. I love 3 Stripe Life. Absolutely love him. And I hope that if he can just sharpen up his jumping, I think he's on hurdles ability. I think he's got the most.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Mighty Potter obviously was a Grade 1 winner as well last year at Punchestown. Those two, in essence, should be the top 2 in here. It's going to be hard, though, because you do have Race Fit and good jumping types like Banbridge, like Enniskerry. I know Enniskerry's probably not up to it, but these are horses that are going to put jumping under the microscope for the likes of Three Stripe Life and Mighty Potter, both of whom could do with sharpening up. So whether I'd be going in on Three Stripe Life at a very short price, I'm not sure. Obviously, I hope he does win. I'd be like you. He's the horse I'd like to win the most. And I'd like to see them maybe put a little bit of class and a bit of a stamp on Banbridge. Not saying they will, but I'd like to see that happen, because I just don't get behind Banbridge being a proper Grade 1 horse. And I think even if Banbridge was to win on the weekend, I would fancy one of the two of them to turn that form around come later in the season.
Big race on Sunday is the return of Honeysuckle in the Hatton's Grace. She's 1-3. She's got to beat Classical Dream, Tiupu, and a few others. You just expect her to go and make history, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. Look, if she can't beat this lot, she's got no chance against Constitution Hill, unfortunately. She's beaten all these horses before. I see no reason to suggest why she won't do it again, and I think she'll do it very impressively as well. I'd say the Henry de Bromhead team will want to kind of send a bit of a statement back, because obviously Constitution Hill's put down a big marker. A lot of British racing fans and Irish racing fans getting very jumpy. I'd say Henry wants to let them know who's the current champion, and I think Honeysuckle will put down that marker on Sunday.
So the final part of this video is going to be our Cheltenham Ante Post selections for the series, as well as best bets for this weekend right at the end. You've got two, I hear. Two. Talk us through them. Yeah,
I do have two. I'm slightly breaking the bank here. It was actually this time last week when I knew this was coming next week, I didn't have any horse for the Cheltenham Ante Post video. I was scrambling around through the markets, and two horses we've actually discussed relatively at length already in this video. I'm going to get them both in novice hurdles, one in the Ballymore, one in the Albert Bartlett. I'm going to have a second go with the Albert Bartlett after a bit of a misfire in our first episode. The one in the Ballymore is Grange Clare West. I think he's a standout price of 10-1. He's 8-1 generally, so whatever you can get, obviously, if you can get that 10-1, do try to do so. But I know a lot of people won't be able to get that. So between 8s and 10s, I think he could easily be a 6-1 chance based off what he's done there at Navan. It was incredibly impressive. He's got speed to burn. I see no suggestion why you'd go up to 3 miles. I see no suggestion why Facile Vega is going to be in the Ballymore. I know people are beating that drum. I don't see it whatsoever. We'll know more after the weekend, but I think he'll stick to 2, and I think this horse will be their main horse over 2.5. And if he manages to stay sound, that's the key, obviously, because he wasn't sound last year after winning his bumper. If they do manage to do that, this is a horse with the world at his feet, I believe. And if he goes and wins a Lawler as an ace in January, he suddenly becomes, 5-2, 3-1 for this race. Whether that's the right price or not is up to interpretation. But I see that being the way it's going to go down. And for the Albert Bartlett, being of no surprise. But I do think, actually, bias aside, this horse is a big price. And it is Xander Clegane. For the Albert Bartlett, you have a horse that you know the target. You know what he's like. He settles well. He jumps superbly. And I know in between Bardenstown Lad and Wrexham for the Albert Bartlett, I've picked potentially slow horses that are going to stay, especially Bardenstown Lad. He was an extremely slow horse. As for Xander Clegane, I think Paul Nolan suggested it and really typified it by, he said to Gary O'Brien that this horse is a stayer with gears. So he's going up in trip, but he has that bit of class to lie up. He's probably got the natural 2.5 mile pace, but the staying capability is a 3. You know his target. You know he's going to go down that route. He's 25-1. I think it's a mad price of 25-1. I could have him in here. I'd make him a bet down to half that price, to be honest, at the moment. Based off what he's done and based off the market. Loads of non-runners in the top of that market. Facile Vega's still in there as third favourite. He's certainly not rocking up here. So those two, like to get them in the book, and fingers crossed they'll do better than the first selection did anyway.
We had a call, admittedly, last night, and we said, who are you going to put up? And he said Grange Clare West, and I went, oh, I was this close for him to going up for me. My book has taken a little bit of a hit, obviously, with American Mike, and I think that Ballymore slip looks unlikely to come in now. I wouldn't completely write it off, but I think we've got to see a much improved American Mike next time out and hope it was just an on-off day. And then the second pick was King of Kingsfield, who won his bumper. I thought he looks a good horse without looking like a superstar. And I must admit, I got a bit of stick for putting up a bumper horse at 12-1 so early on in the season. And you know what? I'm probably justified. And I was coming into this week going, we need to get something on the board here. We need to put a marker down. We're here for business. And the only horse that I like is in a handicap. We're in December, the first week of December. I like the horse for the Pertemps as well. The Pertemps. Now he's 25-1. I'm taking a wild swipe. I thought I'd have a bit of fun this week. And it is Salvador Siggy for Gordon Elliott. Now I want to make a case before you judge this, Andrew, because I know at the moment you've got alarm bells ringing all around, thinking, who am I on this podcast with? He knows absolutely nothing. Let me just make the case. So Salvador Siggy was second in a bumper to Grange Clare West, and I know that you can't argue with that because you put him up. He moved from James Fahey to Gordon Elliott this spring, and he won a maiden and 2 novices. And the second novice, he beat 135 rated horse Piste, giving him £7 for Willie Mullins. 134 rated the Friday Man, who had won his previous 2 starts and then won his following 2 starts before finishing a length second to Plains Indian in a listed race at Limerick. She's Electric was 4th, rated 129 and won twice afterwards. Falconate was 5th, won afterwards and is rated 134. So I think, in summary, that novice hurdle, for a summer novice hurdle, was above average, is what I'm trying to say. He was then stepped up to 3 miles in a conditions hurdle at Down Royal. Bear in mind he's 6, so improvement to come. He beat Off You Go, who I would say is between a top handicapper and a low-graded horse. Third was 150 rated Ronald Pump, who puts down a very solid marker. Dufflecoat was 4th, but the interesting part is Home by the Lee. I'll show it on screen now. He ran out at the second last hurdle, and I'm not saying that Salvador Siggy would have won the race if Home by the Lee hadn't ran out, because I think both of them were going well. But I think it would have been a decent race. And obviously Home by the Lee then went on and won the Liz Mullen, beating Bob Ollinger, Florian Porter, Ashdale Bob. Seriously good horses, stayers hurdle horses down the line. So maybe you can upgrade that run at Down Royal because he was going to run Home by the Lee very close. He then went to Cheltenham in October, ran in the qualifier, 1st to 4th qualifiers this year. There's a bit of a rule change, it's not 1st to 6th. He ran a huge race, finished 4th, qualified. He wasn't fully wound up. I think you can expect him to come on for the run. And he goes straight to the Pertemps. They're going straight to the Pertemps with him. He was dropped £1 for that, from 145 to 144. I'd imagine they might put him up a pound or two when they reassess, but I can't imagine it's going to be a ridiculous change. He's 25-1 for the Pertemps. He definitely runs in the race if he's sound. He won't run beforehand. And I just think that he could be ahead of his mark of 144. And I'm willing to take a wild swipe. A bit of fun this week, 25-1. I will back him each way because it's a very competitive race. I know some people don't like backing horses each way, Ante Post for Cheltenham, but I like to do it just to be on the safe side. Salvador Siggy, 25-1, goes into my book for the Pertemps. We've got Salvador Siggy, American Mike, and King of Kingsfield. Gordon Elliott, hopefully, has a better festival this year than he did last year. What do you make of Salvador Siggy?
Yeah, no, I see the case. I know you've talked to me a couple of times about him. He obviously ran a very eye-catching race at Cheltenham in that Pertemps qualifier that I liked the look of, certainly. I liked the John Joe horse that came 3rd in it, the Philip Burns ridden horse, Shoot First, who won the race as well. I think it was a really smart piece of form. And
yeah, and the second Botox has then went and won at Haydock as well.
Yeah, so the form, it looks robust to me. I think Salvador Siggy could easily have come second if he didn't blow up the run-in as well. So I think that there's plenty to like about it. We probably haven't learned in terms of, we got our fingers burnt on a couple of handicap horses last year, putting them up pretty early. We haven't learned from that, but I don't mind it. I can't say anything. I'm sitting here, I've put up 4 selections, 2 of which in the Albert Bartlett. 1 trained by John McConnell, 1 trained by Paul Nolan. So I'm reverting to type as well as you are. So fingers crossed. I'm hoping for a good Irish week, as are you.
Quickly to fire through the best bets before my camera dies. I've got Moona Macaroona in 11-1 each way in the 12:35 at Sandown on Saturday. 5-Star Getaway at 14-1 each way in the 2:05 at Aintree on Saturday, and Pasteur at 9-1 each way at Fairyhouse on Sunday in the 1:25. And then I would watch Hardy de Menil for Ollie Murphy in the 3:15 at Aintree. He's 20-1. I'm not going to back him, but I do think he's a horse that's better than his handicap mark that could run well in maybe his next start.
Yeah, and my best bets all come from Fairyhouse this weekend, starting off with tomorrow, Saturday's action, the 117 in the big 2 mile handicap chase. I like Grange Walk for John Ryan. Hopefully he's an each way price to get stuck into. Had some good 2 mile handicap form from last year. Moving on to Sunday, the 125, the Royal Bond Novices Hurdle, going to get Marine Nationale in there at 2-1. The 305, the big handicap hurdle, quite like Mano Work each way for Paul Fahey. Cian Cullen takes the ride, takes £7 off him. He's a good horse. He came second in the Lartigue hurdle and his last run over obstacles. I think he's well handicapped and could go close in this type of race. And then the big one, the Porterstown handicap chase at 12.55. My nap was going to be in this race. Now I'm going to actually hedge 2 against the field here because I had down in my best bets Western Zara for the Mayor's handicap chase and the Dabbler as my nap for the Porterstown. I'm still going to have Dabbler as number 1 selection in the Porterstown, given I think he should have won the race last year. He's got good staying form, good prep run over hurdles, and hopefully he's a big each way price. And Western Zara I'm going to play alongside, so a little hedge bet for me in the Porterstown. Fingers crossed between the 2 of them we may have the winner. So 4 or 5 selections overall from 4 races at Fairyhouse. If you are down at Fairyhouse as well over the weekend, me and Dad will be there both Saturday and Sunday, so make sure to come up and hopefully we'll back a winner or 2 together.
If you do enjoy this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you soon.